Hello there! It is time to talk fantasy football once again. Turn that page to the 2023 NFL fantasy football season. I'm Matt Donnelly of RotoBaller, and let's talk about those starts and sits heading into week number 1, and let's focus our attention on the wide receiver position. Now, we know that you are starting your studs, unless, of course, they're named Cooper Kupp and Jerry Jeudy, who are dealing with significant hamstring injuries. Cooper Kupp, he's out there in Minnesota getting his looked at, and we know Jerry Jeudy, he is banged up in a bad way. But that doesn't mean you don't start Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, and A.J. Brown. These guys are starts regardless of their matchups each and every single week. But what if you don't have one of those studs? Well, I'm glad you asked. There are a few receivers that you should feel more than comfortable putting into your week number 1 lineup. Starting off with a pair of Seahawks in Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf as they face the Los Angeles Rams. Jalen Ramsey is no longer in Los Angeles, meaning both Lockett and DK Metcalf are going to have their way with that Rams secondary, a secondary that allowed over 32 fantasy points per game to receivers, and that was with Jalen Ramsey in the lineup. What do you think is going to happen now that he's not there? Number 2, how about DeAndre Hopkins versus New Orleans? We've seen this matchup last season when Hopkins was a member of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Hopkins in that contest, he caught 10 of 14 passes for 103 yards against this same Saints secondary. Now, we know that Treylon Burks, Chigakonko, and Derrick Henry, that is more support than he had in Arizona, and they're coming marching into New Orleans along with him. That means the Saints, they're not going to be able to focus all their attention on Nuke. Number 3, Chris Godwin versus the Minnesota Vikings. Now keep a close eye on Mike Evans and his availability heading into this one, as he is dealing with a groin strain and there's always that risk of re-injury. But if Evans misses time, that means that Chris Godwin is going to benefit the most against a Vikings secondary that was giving it away to opposing wide receivers last season. The second most fantasy points surrendered to the position, not to mention the most receptions, targets, and yards allowed. How about I give you a 4th wide receiver, and that's Courtland Sutton versus Las Vegas. Sutton was on average wide receiver 13 in games in which Jerry Jeudy did not play in 2022. In games in which Jerry Jeudy did play, Sutton was on average wide receiver 152. It's probably a good thing that Jerry Jeudy is probably not going to be available here in week number 1, so fire up Courtland Sutton with confidence. No Jerry Jeudy also means we're going to get Marvin Mims. Why is that important? Mims' speed on the outside should open up more opportunities underneath for Sutton, especially against this Raiders secondary. How about some wide receivers that you need to be sitting? Well, how about the duo there in San Francisco and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk against the Pittsburgh Steelers? Now, I'm not exactly sure where Brock Purdy is in his recovery, but I have a hard time believing that he's anywhere close to 100%. Passes that may have been able to squeeze in through certain windows, they probably aren't going to be able to squeeze in those windows within the first couple weeks of this season. There's also some dude named TJ Watt lining up across from them that can absolutely ruin a passing game. DJ Moore is another wide receiver that I am sitting in week number 1. Chicago may choose to lean heavily on a run game, considering the success they had against the Packers running the ball just a season ago. I'm also old enough to remember the job that Jair Alexander did on Justin Jefferson last season. So here is your quick hitter on wide receiver starts and sits for week number 1. Start Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf against the Ramsey-less Rams team. It wouldn't shock me if both receivers were well over 100 yards. You know what? Fire up Geno Smith as well. Derrick Henry no longer has to get the job done himself, but teams are still going to have to focus on Derrick Henry, which means DeAndre Hopkins is going to be money against the New Orleans Saints. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, the immovable objects, meet the unstoppable force in a bizarro fantasy world here as Baker Mayfield meets the Vikings pass defense. Something has to give, and I like Evans and Godwin all the same. Now, Courtland Sutton, he's a different wide receiver when Jerry Jeudy is not available, and he faces a Raiders team that allowed 31 fantasy points per contest to wide receivers. Now, buyer beware when it comes to the 49ers pass game of Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. TJ Watt, he can absolutely wreck things, and the Steelers secondary is pretty solid. And Jair Alexander, he shut down the best receiver in the NFL during the fantasy playoffs last season, and because of that, I am out on DJ Moore. With that all being said, be sure to hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the RotoBaller YouTube channel for plenty more great fantasy football analysis here in the 2023 season.